So this is we were actually just talking about that. So the way police work is, I asked Matt which state police. On average, in 2.5 so he's done it. So then, yeah, I mean, you respond. Make sure you hit 4 places. So that's the and then the county sheriff now he chooses to specialize on that's so, yeah. So, so that's the argument, and this and then Kick it off? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Down and what's that? So?
Jeremy, tell me about
Thank you everybody for coming tonight for the first community open house for the Irasville Village Master Planning Project. This project is possible with a $45,000 grant from ECCD, right? From the city of Vermont, and a $5,000 match from the town.
Hey, JD, what's that acronym stand for?
Agency of Commerce and Community Development. Thank you, Josh. So we have a few people. We're going to give some opening remarks before our presentation from our consultants at SE Group. So starting us off will be the Chair of the Planning Commission, Jonathan Irasville.
Thanks very much for coming out tonight. I appreciate the enthusiasm, and I hope that we're able to, present something tonight that's really exciting. And it is, as JB said, it's the first of these. We're going to have multiple events as we go through this planning process. And we're really hoping that you all show up to the future events and even more people come to give feedback as we grow this project from just the idea to an actual plan. I do want to thank Anne-Marie Harmon, who couldn't be here tonight, but is sort of the member of our planning commission who shepherded the process of getting the grant in the first place. So thank you very much to Anne-Marie. Thank you also to Fayston, our neighbor, who joined with us in this, so we were able to get more grant funding than we would have been able to get just as our town. So we are very thankful to them for joining us in that. And to everyone, if anyone here is from Warren as well, or Moortown, or Duxbury, anyone in the Valley, Irasville is, the commerce center of our community beyond Waitsfield itself. And so we really appreciate the input we've got and the support we've gotten from our neighboring towns. So thank you to anyone who's not a Waitsfield resident, but wanted to come here and support us anyway and have some input into this. I also wanted to just say to everybody here, this is, again, very early stages. We're going to have several minutes of presentation, I think about 25, 30 minutes of presentations. Following that, we have all these easels set up. These are going to be stations to discuss various aspects of the plan. So please do stay, if you can, for the full duration of the event. There's going to be plenty of opportunity for feedback and discussion with the team and our consultant SE group to talk through your input into this. We really are not here to lecture you about what we think should be done in Irasville. We are here to get your input and feedback on what we should be thinking as we go through this planning process. I am sure many people in the room have been through one of these before, if not multiple. And so one thing I did want to highlight is that a lot has changed since the last time this was done. And a lot in the world has changed and a lot in Waitsfield has changed. Many people here are probably well aware of the wastewater approval that we got this past summer for the bond. Work is well underway on getting that project implemented. And very much of what we're trying to do with master planning depends on finishing that project and making sure that we can grow Irasville as much as needed to accommodate our population and our businesses. So thank you to everyone who supported that. And that is really one of the motivating principles for why we're doing this project now and why we think it's really important to get a new plan in place ahead of getting the project done so that we know what as a community we want to be building in this space with the new capacity that wastewater allows for. So very grateful to all that's gone before us. I know Alex will be talking about some of the past projects that have been done, but now that we have this wastewater plan in motion, it really is time to rethink how we're going to plan and develop Irasville to be the community center and the civic center that we need as a community going forward. So I'm going to leave it at that and leave it to Brian Shue to talk from the select board.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. I'm going to give just a really brief historical context for Irasville and then talk a little bit about what we're planning for the future. Back in the 70s, my understanding is when the town first started talking about managing growth and development that was happening, and the Hurons and Bisbees were wanting to expand out of the village. They talked about how to zone the property for new development, how to zone the town. And one of the considerations was let's make Route 100 a commercial strip. And other people said, well, wait a minute, why don't we just kind of look at Irasville as a new village, a new compact area? And fortunately, wiser has prevailed, and that's what was done. So really, it's been our growth center and the Valley's growth center since the mid-70s at least. At the time, though, when you look at the old zoning, they just defined it, the town defined it as an automobile-oriented shopping center district. And basically, that's what they got, kind of a well-designed shopping centers parking behind the buildings. But it wasn't very pedestrian-friendly. And as thinking changed over time in the 80s and 90s, the planning commission in the town started to say, well, wait a minute, that's not a village, that's a shopping center. So how do we grow this area in a way that is more pedestrian friendly, that has more character, and is kind of a more vibrant area? And we started these master planning processes, and the town started to look at what do we do to support this area through infrastructure. And the select board and the planning commission worked together to get funds for sidewalks. 10 years ago, we put in a water system. At that time, the town narrowly defeated a vote for a sewer system. There's been more consideration since then. There's more funding opportunities. And as Jonathan said, and as most folks know, we had a 3-to-1 vote in support of a bond for a sewer system, and we're working on funding for that. So we're really excited about this process. We have a lot of potential for development in Irasville. We have, if and when, or hopefully I'll say when, the sewer system goes through, it's going to create a lot of opportunity. So how we shape that opportunity is really an important outcome for tonight. So we're really excited about this. And one thing, from a personal standpoint, I want to say is really be visionary. If there's a property that is developed or it has a parking lot on it, it doesn't always need to stay that way. A lot of redevelopment occurs around the country, and there's a lot of opportunity for that in Irasville, I hope. So that will hopefully be part of the conversation. But the select board, I think, Josh Curtis is here, Larissa Erbster was here earlier. The select board really support the planning commission's effort. We are glad to endorse the grant application. I'm glad to be working on the sewer system and really looking forward to the outcome of this effort. So thanks everybody for coming. And I'm going to introduce Josh Schwartz, who's going to talk a little bit about, I think, half the things I just said.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, I'm going to say probably a quarter of what I was going to say, but thank you, Brian. And I think, so Joshua Schwartz with the Mad River Valley Planning District, our 3-town planning entity for the towns of Waitsfield, Ward, and Fayston. And we're really proud of Waitsfield's leadership on this project and the larger community coming together in support of envisioning what Irasville can be. 100 years ago, Irasville Flats was well established as an agricultural hamlet. And over time, with the boom of the ski industry in the second half of the 19th century, it evolved and grew, as Brian said, as like a 70s strip mall development. And that continued to evolve and change with conversion of those homesteads and residential properties to become commercial, a partial grid network, more pedestrian accommodation over time. And what has kept it from continuing to evolve is the lack of infrastructure, water and wastewater infrastructure, the lack of having a coordinated approach to stormwater and wetlands. And as a result, it's been a fragmented growth and development. So I think this project is an opportunity to capitalize on the work that's happened in the past, which is, the last time planning for Irasville took place in a wholesale way was just about 20 years ago, 2 decades ago, which is wild to think. But there's a lot to work off of, and I think, Alex will be highlighting that work. But there are other challenges of today, from a housing crisis to changing demographics to flood vulnerability, a variety of things that are central to the questions that and the opportunity that we have. And so I think having this had been envisioned in the town plan for Waitsfield and Warren and Fayston at different times as the downtown for the Mad River Valley, and it serves a key role. So I think, again, I appreciate everybody being here. I appreciate being on this journey, and I really encourage your involvement and input, because this is a distinct opportunity that we have to look at things differently and position our larger community for the days ahead. So thank you.
Thanks, Josh. So I'm Alex Willens. I'm with SE Group. We are the consultant on this project. We've been working with the town for a couple of years now. We were involved with the recent zoning bylaws updates that went through at the beginning of this past year. We had a nice open house in a similar format in this room about a year and a half ago. And we were super gratified to be able to continue working with the town on this effort. We're based out of Burlington. We work with communities of all sizes across Vermont and the Northeast. And we really like working here in the Mad River Valley. I'm going to just bring us through a presentation that talks about where we've been spending our time with the steering committee on this project, looking at what's on the ground in Irasville, getting a little bit deeper into what's been done previously in terms of past plans and studies, and with a couple forward-looking thoughts. And then we'll talk a little bit about our exercise that we're all going to work on together today as well, which is getting you all to provide some input that's really going to help form the next tranche of work on this project. So I think of this project in terms of 5 different steps. We want to understand what's come before us in terms of development and thinking about the future of Irasville. We want to articulate what the community would like to see in the future. And that's through an iterative process with our steering committee, the planning commission, and the public. We want to make sure the public is involved at those key milestones in the process. We want to envision what things could look like in the future. So we don't want to just kind of talk about it in generalities. We want to actually put pen on paper and illustrate some concepts for that. And then that's going to all culminate in strategic recommendations. So that can refer to strategies to invest in infrastructure, further revisions to zoning bylaws, and other strategies that the town and other community partners in the valley can take to advance this vision forward. JB went over some of the nuts and bolts of this, but we are looking at about a year-long process to do this. We are pretty early in that process. Ultimately, this is a project of the Irasville Planning Commission, but we do have a broader steering committee that includes Planning Commission members, but also has representation from Select Board, the business community, conservation organizations, a really well-represented group. And JB mentioned this is almost entirely grant funded through the state, so we're grateful for the state's investment and support of planning for this kind of work. All right. So Irasville, just so we're on the same page about where Irasville is, what we're talking about, we are looking at a study area that consists of the entire zoning district that covers Irasville currently. So that is all the way down Route 100 past Fiddler's Green, up through what we think about as the kind of the shopping area, right around where Toast and Eggs is. That's kind of the transition where that district ends. So that's our study area for this project that we'll be looking at, and you'll see a lot of maps of this in the coming slides. I was going to spend a little time talking about history, but we got a great history lesson already. But it's cool to see Josh was able to dig up some great historical photos. So this is the agricultural hamlet that Josh is referring to. So kind of classic Vermont village center, surrounded by some agricultural fields, cleared out. Later in the 20th century, start to see more of that automobile-oriented development coming in with shopping plazas, and then we kind of have an overview of what we see today, which is our area where we have a little bit of a jumble of buildings and roads. We're starting to see better pedestrian connections, and all of that's kind of interspersed with some wetlands. Before we dive too deep into kind of the planning jargon here, I want to spend a little time talking about some key concepts that we're thinking about in this work. So once this term density comes up a lot, planners love to talk about density. Great example of density is in Waitsfield Village. So you have their buildings with a larger massing, they're close to the road, they cover a large portion of the lot. And that's kind of what we see in village centers, right? It's this compact settlement pattern, clustered uses. There's a lot of benefits to this clustering. It's more efficient use of infrastructure. Instead of one road going to one business, we have one road serving many different uses. It's a more walkable pattern. We know walkability is driven by sidewalks and having safe access, but it's also the proximity of destinations to each other. So a walkable pattern is going to be a more compact pattern. To get to where you want to go in terms of thinking about a village center, from where you have in Irasville, really thinking a lot about infill development. So that's development that comes into an already developed area. We're not thinking about clearing out additional forest or expanding boundaries. You want to think about how can development come in and fit in using existing infrastructure and already developed areas. So Mad River Chase Place is a great example of infill development that's occurred in Irasville, and that's something that we'll be looking at further. So these terms will come up again, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page as we move forward. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to buzz through a lot of what we've been looking at as far as existing conditions in Irasville. So that's what's on the ground as far as the built environment, natural resources, and infrastructure. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of those past planning efforts and concepts in a little greater detail. So we're going to start with our natural context, because especially in the Mad River Valley, I think you're reminded of your natural context pretty frequently. You have views, you have floods, you have forests, you recreate outdoors. That's really important to think about. If we are looking at growth center in there, how does the natural context of the valley shape that growth center potential? So we're evaluating that for Irasville. First thing we look at, especially in light of the last couple of years, is flood hazards. It's a big problem in Vermont. A lot of Vermont's village centers are flood prone. Fortunately, Irasville largely is not. It's up on a bit of a plateau away from the main stem of the Mad River, a good amount of elevation above that. So down there in the solid red is your floodplain, and then that hatched area is your kind of river corridor area where the river maybe could migrate to in the future. But your developed area in Irasville is up and away from that river corridor. So that's great. So that's, especially in the context of the Mad River Valley, there's not a lot of places like that you can think about for development in that regard. So that's super important, and it was good to check that box at the beginning of the process. What is a big consideration for the future of development in Ireland? So the Irasville. So all those blue polygons are your mapped wetlands. The town commissioned a wetlands mapping project in 2021. So there is very detailed mapping of current wetland extents. Within that, there are a variety of wetland functions that we are cognizant of. So that wetland study looked at what is this particular wetland doing as far as providing habitat, storing floodwaters, or providing other kind of ecosystem functions. And we know there's a variety in Irasville. Some wetlands are kind of basically just a field. Others actually have a water course going through and provide some kind of flood mitigation, flood storage function that can impact flooding along the Mad River potentially. So that's something that we're keeping a very close eye on when we think about, are there opportunities to impact lower functioning wetlands to provide use that's going to be beneficial to the community? Is there an opportunity to offset those impacts within Irasville to bolster wetlands function, or at least keep it the same? We're also cognizant of the history of wetlands impacts in Irasville. So there's little purple pins in here, which may be a little hard to see. Each pin represents a wetlands permit that's been granted by the state since 1992. So there's something like 20 of them. And so each one of those represents a wetland impact of some degree that's occurred in about the last 30 years. So that's something that will certainly factor into our planning as we move forward. Also the topography. So we have a pretty constrained area that we're thinking about in Irasville. That district that I showed before, that study area, more or less represents these areas of flatter topography, which you see in white. Anything on this map that you're starting to see more like light to dark orange is a slope that is going to be unsustainable to build on. So when we think about wetlands versus steep slopes, kind of have identified like, here's where the areas that we would look at for infill development. Here's the areas we would stay away from. But fortunately for Irasville, you do have an area that's kind of unusually flat and elevated out of the floodplain for the Mad River Valley. So that's, just in terms of the regional context, really important for thinking about why this would be the growth center. All right, talking about the built environment. This may be a little bit hard to see. So this is a map of the current land use in Irasville. So each of those dots, it represents an individual building, and the colors are coded for what the use of that building is. So your reds are going to be commercial uses. Your oranges and yellows will be residential uses. Lighter yellows are single family residences, and more of the orange are multifamily residences. And so it's interesting to just see how the different areas of Irasville have kind of developed in terms of being commercial centers versus more residential centers. And something we want to think about going forward is, if we understand that there's a housing crunch in the valley and in the state, and that Irasville is kind of the commercial center for the Mad River Valley, how can we think about a mix of those uses coming in, including potentially a mix of uses in a single development? That's something we'll look at going forward. Transportation infrastructure, so I mentioned that before. Right now, we have Route 100 as kind of your main thoroughfare, and then it's a little bit of a jumble in terms of commercial driveways and other access roads. You can see in the lighter purple there, that's your current sidewalk network. So thanks to some great work recently, Route 100 is starting to have a well-connected sidewalk network. But getting further into Irasville, it's a little bit of there's some disconnects as far as getting around as a pedestrian. You're also confronting a little bit of what I call kind of the rural build-out problem where, because there's not village blocks like you might have in a larger downtown, it kind of constrains a little bit of the area you might have to develop because of, kind of the lack of road frontage. So what's happened in some places, like if you're driving Waterbury up to Stowe, you have a single line of buildings on both sides of the road going all the way up from one town to the other. That was something that Waitsfield has intentionally tried to avoid to past planning. That's what Brian alluded to before. So that's part of the transportation infrastructure is really key as you think about redevelopment potential, because you need that road frontage to support future development. I will also note, and I'll circle back to this later, there is some active work going on and thinking about an active transportation corridor along Route 100. So building those bicycle and pedestrian connections that will connect through Irasville to other destinations along Route 100. That's something that will factor into our planning as well. Another thing we're thinking about with built environment is impervious surfaces. So in this map, you have your wetland areas in blue. Your road network is shown in black. That's one form of impervious surface. Your building footprints are in red. Those are impervious surfaces. And then your kind of surface parking areas, whether they're paved or gravel, are all considered impervious area as well. So anytime you're in an impervious area, you're going to have runoff. You're going to have areas where water cannot percolate into the ground. So anytime you're expanding that, you have to think about how that additional kind of stormwater runoff and capacity would be handled or mitigated. So thinking about strategies that can encourage development kind of within already existing areas of impervious surface will be something that we will try to keep a close eye on as we move forward in this. All right, so that's a speed run through kind of what's on the ground as far as natural resources and infrastructure in the built environment. I will have a link at the end for our project website. It has all those maps that I just showed plus some others on there. They're all interactive, so if you want to spend some more time with that information, you can go on there and engage with that at a greater level of detail. Talking about past planning. So this was alluded to a lot already by our other speakers. I'm just going to talk in a little bit more detail about what some of these past plans and studies looked at and what the context for those efforts were at the time and what we are taking away from those and trying to apply going forward. So the big plan that was done previously was this master development plan for the Irasville Growth Center, completed in 2002. This identified a very ambitious redevelopment concept, essentially covering the entire study area. This identified, depending on how these individual envisioned building units coming in, would be 120 to 230 new units of housing. And envisioned creation of significant new roadway infrastructure, traffic calming along Route 100 to create a village gateway, and kind of activate these side road connections that were going to be the home to new residential and commercial uses. Also significant impacts to wetlands. So like a lot of those blue polygons that we're seeing for wetlands on the previous screen don't exist on here. So they did identify some concepts for how that could be mitigated, but it was certainly a net loss of wetland. So, one of the this is a pretty ambitious vision, but as was mentioned before, to achieve this, you do need to have those infrastructure pieces in place, water, and then sewer being the real big one, not only to meet state permitting requirements, but to have a safe community where you're not impacting water quality through septic disposal. So those, amongst other factors, were some of the reasons why this did not move forward in a significant way. Some other concepts that have been developed for Irasville. So this is maybe a little bit hard to see, but this is actually developed in 1998 as a concept for how a slow road could be made into more of a main street for the community. So that area between Slow Road and what was then Grand Union, now Shaw's, was identified as being a space for a dense row of buildings hosting a mix of uses with an activated pedestrian frontage, space for things like outdoor dining, hanging out. And so it was interesting to see just how, from this concept of just kind of using existing infrastructure and identifying kind of a hub for where redevelopment efforts could focus in the future. That's something that we've spent some time with the steering committee talking about, what could Slow Road do in a redevelopment vision for the future. So it was really interesting to see this articulated, almost 25 years ago as a similar concept. This is a recent concept prepared by a couple local architects, looking at a similar idea of thinking about how could you establish a main street for Irasville that's not Route 100, that might be more appropriate for a hub of future development. And similar to what we identified before, thinking about the transportation infrastructure as kind of that catalyst for future development. So are there ways you could establish village blocks, for example, that would provide those connections and those street frontages to promote future development? So we're not starting from scratch in this process, which is awesome. There's been so much good thinking and planning and ideas that have been thrown out before. A lot of our charge is thinking about how does this match the current reality and what's going to be within the capacity of the town and the partners to invest in and change as far as infrastructure investments, policy changes, things of that nature. Lots of recent planning progress. This is a lot of us have touched on before, but I just want to make sure that folks are clear about everything that's happened. Town has recently updated the town plan that clearly identifies Irasville as a growth center with the goal of concentrating most future development in Waitsfield in Irasville. This is not only a strategy to kind of grow and sustain what Irasville can be for the community, but also to kind of conserve what we like about the more rural areas of the valley and avoid excessive development in those areas. Mentioned before the zoning bylaws update, we called that the Vibrant Villages update. So that did revise the zoning bylaws for both village areas in Waitsfield, looking at tweaks to start to allow some more of that infill development. The neighborhood development area designation, that's a state program, and through receiving that designation, that opened up funding streams for the town to invest in the wastewater project. Also has some benefits in terms of streamlining Act 250 reviews and things like that. A lot of that will be changing with some of the recent legislation, but there's a lot of benefits that have come with that. You heard a lot about the community wastewater project. That's obviously a key catalyst for all of this. And I mentioned before that Route 100 active transportation corridor study. So there's a lot that's going on and a lot that is informing and catalyzing this work. And so this is in some ways a culmination of this work, but also a continuation of it. All right, a couple other things that I want to highlight just from our review of existing conditions, things that we're thinking about going forward. Part of the wastewater project is to address and hook up properties with old, aging, underperforming septic systems to address water quality issues. There will be additional remaining capacity within that project that can support future infill development in Irasville. So that's really key. And so part of what we're thinking about is, what could be that mix of uses that can be accommodated and use some of that capacity going forward to increase commercial and residential development in the village area. And I probably don't have to explain to everyone about the housing challenge in this area statewide. This has been studied. There's a 2020 study identified a large housing shortage in the Mad River Valley specifically, and identified specific types of housing units that are needed, that are in particularly short supply. So that's something that will certainly inform our thinking as we think about what is that mix of uses that could come in the future. So just to put a button on all of that, here's, I think, just what we think at this stage, what we're thinking about that sets up the next phase of the process, our kind of key understandings of what's going on and what has happened in Irasville. This is a regionally significant project for a lot of reasons that we talked about earlier. And Irasville is a very suitable area for thinking about this, and especially in the context of the Mad River Valley and the opportunities and constraints that it presents. The town's well positioned to move forward on this type of planning effort at this time and to actually act on it. It's an opportunity to address housing and commercial development needs. And when I say commercial development, I also think about things like community services. We know that that's been a longstanding need. I understand that there's some challenging news recently with health clinic. Part of what this is thinking about is, can you develop a critical mass of people and commercial activity that can be self-sustaining in Irasville and support those kinds of uses sustaining in the future. Infill development is critical. We don't want to expand the growth boundary. We want to think about what happens within it. Planning within the context and constraints of our natural resources will be important. And then the transportation piece is critical. Transportation infrastructure is going to drive a lot of this. So it's a very comprehensive approach that we're taking and thinking about all the different aspects that feed into village center planning through this process. Okay, so that was a lot of talking at you. Thank you for your attention. We're going to transition into the next phase of this event. And what we're going to do, we have two sets of stations on either side of the room here. Both of them are the same thing. What we've identified as a steering committee, based on all this information that we've been spending time with and considering, is a set of draft community design objectives for Irasville. So these are some more prescriptive statements that we feel would help us drive this next phase of conceptual design and visioning for Irasville. So that's statements that relate to the types of housing that would like to come in, how we're going to handle natural resources, what our priorities would be for commercial development. So when we go back as SE Group with our designers, we know what we're kind of designing for and preparing some conceptual visions. So at each station, essentially you'll be presented with these objectives and you're just gonna rate using a little sticker poll your agreement with that statement. So scale of strongly agree to strongly disagree. Do you agree that this is something that we should be considering as we move forward in this planning process? Pretty simple. At the end, there will be a kind of an open-ended board where you can write in any additional feedback related to the presentation, anything that you wanted to see or didn't see on the community design objectives, anything else that you think we should be considering as we move forward in this process. We will also be around to answer questions and have a conversation with folks. We do encourage you to provide all of your feedback on the boards. That's how we'll be recording it. So I'm happy to hear your ideas and thoughts, so please make sure you record them physically on the boards. Any questions about that?
Yeah, just a global question. Why are we limiting ourselves to Irasville? Why aren't we going all the way to the elementary school as we look at the needs of our valley floor?
Sure. I can provide my thoughts, and then if Jonathan, if you want to provide your thoughts there. So there's been a lot of thought in terms of identifying Irasville as the growth center, and part of that is the existing growth patterns in Irasville versus Waitsfield Village. Waitsfield Village is pretty densely developed, has some flood challenges. There's not as much space in there to think about, what more development could go in there. There could be redevelopment of some of those properties. Irasville is your opportunity to think maybe a little bit bigger as a community for a redevelopment vision. And that's also been the focus of all the infrastructure improvements. So expanding that water and wastewater capacity. So a lot of it is in alignment with all of this different work that's come before. But if there's anything to add to that?
Yeah, and certainly we're not ignoring the village. And as Alex alluded, there's a neighborhood designation that we've gotten that actually includes both. This specific project, for two reasons, is focused on Irasville. The first is that the town plan identifies Irasville specifically as the growth center. And so in alignment with sort of what's already been approved by the town, that's where our primary focus is. The second is actually related to the grant funding for this program, which is, the grant was for the Irasville development section. And so unfortunately, due to the strictures of applying the grant funding, we are somewhat limited in that. That being said, I don't think there's anything about the ideas that we're pulling out of this that is limited to Irasville alone. And certainly identifying geographic areas, that's where we're focused here. But as far as ideas about what the community needs, about what types of developments we want to look for, and what types of projects we want to encourage as a community, if we can't find a place for it in Irasville, we're not going to forget about it. We're not going to leave those ideas by the wayside just because there wasn't a great place for them. The ultimate end result of this will be a report that highlights what our community needs, and will include things like, there's clearly a need for X, Y, and Z. We've identified, so many places we can put them in Irasville, but we believe there's a need to look, potentially to the village or elsewhere in town for certain other needs that aren't being met. And so I will just own that it's very much on my mind, because I had the same exact thought as you when we started this project. We had just done the neighborhood designation, and I've been looking at both, and then to have it narrowed just to Irasville was somewhat confusing to me personally. And so that is, unfortunately, it's sort of the combination of the town plan and the grant itself. But please don't limit your imagination to just what you can envision in Irasville. If there are needs that you think could be met or should be met, and you can't immediately see where Irasville would fill that, please still share with us, and know that we're going to be continuing to develop our ideas of what we can do more broadly. Yeah. And I should say the zoning changes that have taken place, there are differences in the zoning changes for Irasville and the village, but both have been modified to account for wastewater and more dense development once wastewater takes place. That's partly driven by state law, but we did certainly look ahead to the future to ensure that once we have the capacity wastewater-wise to build more densely, we're not strictly limiting ourselves to a subset of what's available.
And wastewater is going towards.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
So I do one or two questions, and then want to get folks started on the exercise, and then we'll be around to answer questions. But I didn't see you at the end.
I just had a question on wetlands and floodplains. Yeah. So wetlands, is the assumption that existing wetlands are going to stay there and we're not going to build anything on the wetlands? Or, and this is just because this is not really my expertise, or is there some wetlands might be built on, but others will stay? And same with floodplain, like is that a no build zone or is that a maybe?
Yeah, so I'd say wetlands, we would look at, particularly for wetlands that are not really providing much of a wetland function, like habitat or flood storage, if there is a community beneficial use and an opportunity to put that there and offset that impact, those are kind of things that we would look at potentially through this and exploring what those trade-offs are going to be. Floodplain, I think we're going to stay away from. Vermont's been learning the lessons about developing floodplain. Yeah. All right, one more question and then let's go.
I'm just curious, when we speak about Irasville, can you help me understand, or us understand, how many plots of land, how many pieces are available for development? How many landowners are involved in this specific section of the town?
I don't know if we have the exact number offhand as far as number of landowners, so we can understand that pretty readily. It's an interesting mix. So you have some very large parcels currently that cover, over they're in the double digits in terms of acres that cover multiple developments. And then you have some small postage stamp lots as well. And that was part of what we were looking at with the zoning process, was creating more flexibility for things to be subdivided, redeveloped in different ways. And so, yeah, it is a mix of, folks who just own their own home and they live there versus kind of, corporate landlords who own the property and rent out commercial space and things like that. So we are going to do some one-on-one outreach to just some landowners and just make them aware of this process and invite them in. But part of what we're sorting out is, what is the role of the town in terms of kind of regulating what can happen in the future versus kind of partnering with maybe different entities to advance particular redevelopment vision. So they all kind of come in at a different spot. There's not going to be a very clean way to say like, okay, everybody's doing this thing now. That's just not how it'll work in the future. So certainly we'll have to sort out. All right, I know there's a bunch more questions, but I do think we just want to get to this next part. We will be available to answer any additional questions and clarifications. So,
I was wondering if I could ask you
Yes.
guys to ask a question to the group while we're assembled as a group still. And you don't have to, but if you could ask a show of hands of business owners leasing and then business owners who actually own the property within this area.
in terms of who's in attendance,
Yeah, that's up to you if you want to do it or not, just curious.
anyone would like to identify themselves as a business owner? Thanks for being here.
Hey, we add on to that, how many people here live in Irasville?
Yeah, raise your hand if you live in Iris. All right. Yeah, 5.5. All right. Cool. All right. So this next part will take just a little bit of resorting. The way these boards are set up, you'll start at one end down there and work your way down to the end. You'll get a little page of sticker dots and you'll put them down on these boards as you go through. There's about a dozen or so prompts on there. You'll use your dots to vote. We'll be around to answer questions. Please do it thoughtfully, but also don't linger so long because people are going to be in line. Thank you all so much.
I think it's working.
Yeah, it's funny how like everyone, you know, I was like, oh, I should go spend some time on that. Like, you guys were all over it.
I mean,
Yeah, you're like, Jesus, I'm like, right, you said that.
and this, like recognizing that it's 2 decades old.
Sorry, I'm just the question. That guy every time. Hi, Karen. Nice to meet you.
So, coffee farm. I don't want to be like too demeaning.
Oh, okay.
KS coffee.
Yeah, Blue Valley Youth Center for Line.
Oh, okay, yeah. So rather, yeah.
So she's
Oh, yeah, I bet.
I'm here.
she has everything.
Okay. That's
I'm the captain audience in my little
Yeah, she has no words. If you do this, she can commission.
Yeah, briefly on the wedding industry. My husband or wedding
Question about community space. Did you
Yes, yeah, Josh is so good. Shared that with us. Yeah, it is something that I think we'd like to look at. I know there's some interest like in the stadium potentially expanding and providing something like that. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think that it makes a lot of sense for here where everything else is. So yeah, that's something we'll certainly
And what about the village green that is, really important open space
I
right
think we
now?
want to not touch that. That's part it's there. It's like if you really like it, we'll be very supportive of that. But yeah, we need to add additional like flexible space. So far as I said, no.
I think there's just kind of a danger that when development starts to happen, that you kind of go so far off it, get carried away with building, and then things become expensive. We're trying to build more affordability in the community, and you can really price that right. You know, by having too much high-end, there's places that people on the income can't go.
Big towns right now, it's so
Do something. But also, oh.